Hello, my perspicacious art sluts. It's Allison Moon, and you're listening to a brand new episode of the Artgasm podcast. I don't know if I've called you perspicacious yet. Probably. I can't remember at this point. I've lost track of how many, $5 adjectives I've used to describe you. But you know what? Even if I've used it before, just know that I still think that you're perfectly perspicacious, and I appreciate you in all those ways. So you are listening to a new episode of Artgasm. I'm delighted that on today's episode, I'm bringing you an interview with Midori. Midori is one of my favorite artists, and I think she does an incredible job of kind of typifying the point of the Artgasm podcast, which is the emergence of sex and art. And Midori, as a sex educator and also as an artist, has this beautiful way of kind of stepping in both worlds almost simultaneously. She integrates a lot of questions and interesting issues around sex and gender in her performance and visual art. And she also integrates a lot of artistry practices in her sex ed teaching. And I've been friends with her and colleagues and just fond of her work for years. And I'm so delighted to bring you her work today. Before we get to that, just one little kind of news item that I thought was interesting that I wanted to talk about briefly. Is that I saw something on Twitter, because I'm on Twitter often, which is always too much. But I was on Twitter and I saw somebody, and I don't know if they were tweeting this sarcastically or not, and it actually doesn't really matter who said it or why. But they had tweeted that, the sex scenes are pointless. Let's just make more stuff that doesn't have sex scenes in it. And, of course, I vehemently disagreed. But what I found really interesting was the way that people responded. And again, whether or not this person was being facetious or not, people responded with sincerity. And a lot of people were like, yeah, I look at those Christian websites and those family websites to see what movies I should just always avoid or what scenes that I should just fast forward through and all that stuff. And, it kind of hurt my soul a little bit because, I think sex scenes are almost always really useful, really important. And I don't think that sex scenes should just be considered like, sauce on top of cheesecake. I think that it's often integral to the story, especially when, quote unquote, done right. And I think that there are plenty of reasons to have sex scenes in a film. And I think often it's character development, often it's plot development, which is one of the reasons why I think so often sex in films and TV is kind of degrading and kind of shitty, is because we have to use it to develop plot or character. And, in very rarely in films and TV is everybody happy and everybody's doing things right. So often we see sex scenes that are people cheating or sex scenes that are people using each other to get information or just, sex for nefarious reasons. But I also really love it when you see sex between, a happy married couple and you get to see the way that they love each other or see the way that they look at each other. And I think that it's particularly great when you see sex scenes that are where the actors and the director are all clearly on the same page with how the sex functions in the film. And I'm actually thinking right now of a sex scene that takes place really early on in the TV show The Path between the married couple. And it's it's hot and it's beautiful and it's romantic and it's actually one of the most realistic married sex scenes I've ever seen because, as somebody who's been partnered for 14 years to my partner, it's really funny to see sex scenes that are like, yep, that's what sex looks like when you've been married for a number of years. And it feels really nice when that happens. But I think it's really important. It's like, okay, these people really love each other so that when, the bottom falls out in their relationship later, you see the struggle to try and stay together, but at the same time, why certain circumstances are tearing them apart. And I was actually thinking about this because I had my predilections challenged a little bit with a TV show that I recently watched with my partner. Of course, because we've been in quarantine for quite a long time, we've been diving into TV and film that we've, hadn't really caught when it came through and came around the first time. And one of those things is True Detective. So my partner and I watched True Detective, the very first season, I think maybe last month or 2 weeks ago. And, I loved it. I had been told I would love it, but I tend to avoid TV shows that glorify violence against women, and I just tend not to be interested in crime shows too much. Particularly right now, these days, it's really weird to watch a show in which cops are heroes, and that's a whole other thing. But watching the show, I strongly recommend it. It's really quite good. It undermines a lot of the tropes around cops and cops being good guys, which is nice. And at the same time, I think that was really well done. But I had a real problem with the sex scenes. And so the first, I think I'm getting this right. I think the first 3 sex scenes in the whole first season are starring Woody Harrelson's character. And the very first one, which I think is in the very first episode, is this lurid kind of male gazy, just exploitative, objectifying scene in which his much younger lover just gets fully naked and the camera's just lingering over her body, and it's a very explicit sex scene, and she's definitely like bouncing up and down on Woody Harrelson's character, and it's this whole, it just felt kind of like, wow, it was the first time in a long time I can remember watching a TV show and being like, Jesus, are you not cutting? We're not cutting. Oh, we're staying here we're staying here. Why? I don't know. And it felt a little gross to me, actually. It felt a little exploitative. I'm like, okay, well, all right, this is just titillation for titillation's sake. And, I'm not necessarily against titillation for titillation's sake, but I would like it to at least feel earned to a certain degree, like kind of giving you the intellectual and emotional rest that you might want to kind of coda after one set of things into a new one. I can see reasons for titillation, but I kind of was like, wow, this is just... okay. So I didn't love it, but I'm like, this is just an interesting tonal shift. Now, granted, True Detective has a history in pulp, and of course, pulp being pulp means there's definitely a lot of kind of exploitation of women's bodies and the age dynamics and the power dynamics between the old grizzled cop and the young, beautiful, nubile innocent. So I know that that's part of the trope already, but I definitely felt like, yeesh, okay. And then there's another sex scene not too long after, between Woody Harrelson and his wife. That's not quite as exploitative, but similarly kind of like they're just going for it. They're just gonna have us enjoy watching two people have sex. And then I think there's a third. I think it might be before the fourth scene. There's a whole other scene with Woody Harrelson with a whole other naked woman who's like 30 years younger than him, and it feels odd. And I feel like it's funny because like the power dynamics are so clear, his misogyny is so clear, his alcoholism is so clear, his homophobia is so clear, all of his moral failings as a character are so already expressed that the sex scenes don't do anything for it. It doesn't further it in any way to know that he's still having sex with incredibly inappropriate partners, and that power dynamic is really exploitative and gross, and that he's violent and jealous and kind of just misogynistic through and through. So that happens 3 times. And then there's a 4th sex scene, and that stars Matthew McConaughey's character. And Matthew McConaughey's character is presented as kind of the ideological, I won't say like opposition to Woody Harrelson's character, but a very different form of this kind of aggrandized masculinity. And his very much more of a familiar character for like the intellectual left, kind of this cynical, existential nihilist kind of character that I think is definitely more fun for a person like me to watch. And he has a little bit more of a moral center, even though he is the nihilist. And I think that they're kind of presenting that as, wasn't this interesting that the nihilist would be the more sympathetic character rather than this, family man. So there's a sex scene with Matthew McConaughey's character that is the stylistic opposite of all of these other scenes. And very clearly, the woman does not get naked. The camera does not linger over her nude, curvy body. Instead, it is fast. It is aggressive. It is just driven by lust, and it is the meeting of equals. It is 2 people who actually connect on an intellectual and emotional level, who go for it. And it's hot. It's actually a scene where I'm like, all right. Yeah, it's hot because it feels real. It feels like 2 people who just are tearing at each other because they just can't take not tearing at each other anymore. It's great. I loved it. And what's so great about it is it actually does a huge amount of work for both plot and character. It drives the plot very, very quickly into a whole new direction, and it drives the fragmentation of the central male friendship, and it drives a lot of the emotional weight and frustration of the 2 male characters, and it actually creates this linchpin moment where you actually understand this mystery of the broken friendship from the beginning of the show. It is brilliantly done, and it is sexy as hell. And in that, it actually put into focus the other sex scenes that led up to the sex scene. Because I do not think that those other sex scenes were just existing for pure exploitation purposes. I do think that the director and the writers and the actors intended for it to be this kind of saccharine, gooey, soft core kind of vibe, because it then contrasted so dramatically with this other kind of sex scene, which was raw, real, human, adult, and on somewhat equal terms. And those equal terms meant that it allowed for the power of the plot to move forward in a specific way. Which is all to say, I think sex scenes really do matter. I think that the sex scenes are really great, and I think that they can be used in very powerful ways, in ways that scenes that involve conversation or fistfights or car chases cannot. And so I think that it's great to be able to think about how you can use a sex scene to drive character, to drive choices, especially when it's beyond the, oh no, we're cheating and now this is going to force the plot in a specific direction. I think it's really wonderful to be able to use sex, understanding that sex is another aspect of our society and our culture, and how the choices by which we have sex, who we have sex with, when we have sex, why we have sex, these things are actually really useful as storytelling devices. And so if you are a creator of stories in any way, I think it's really useful to kind of sit with the sex scene and think not just now they have sex or now they avoid having sex, but why and what it can serve, and how the way that, like, how people can have sex in all the various ways that people can, what it can tell an audience about character and story. Anyway, so that's that. Allow me now to introduce to you my friend and colleague, Midori. Her work she's kind of iconic in certain communities, and I strongly recommend you look her up. If you are familiar with the Shibari and bondage at all, you probably know her work already. And in this episode, in this interview, we talk a lot about her performance and installation art, and I'm a huge installation art fan, and her work is quite evocative and quite beautiful. If you'd like to, if you're at a place where you can safely look at your computer while you're listening to this podcast, I recommend going to a website, Ranshin, RINSHIN.com, and you can see a lot of her work there. She also drops a couple of other links. So as we're describing some pieces, you can then, if you like the visual, you can look along with, which I think can be really helpful. And also there's a kind of a meta aspect to this interview too that I would like to point out to folks. I think Midori is incredibly good at describing how her art looks, which is, I think, a really challenging thing for a lot of people to do. So if you're in the position ever of having to write an artist statement, God forbid, or just have to distill your work into language, which a lot of artists are not good at, I'd say listen on multiple levels to the way that Midori describes her stuff, because she's really great at explaining what it looks like, the materials she uses, and then also the kind of effect that it has on a space, which I think is really useful. And I think it's pretty impressive. We talked about it after I stopped recording, so I was just like, how did you learn how to do this? This is incredible. So I strongly recommend considering looking into that yourself, because it's a really useful skill set for a lot of us. All right, well, without further ado, allow me to introduce to my interview with Midori. Perfect. Well, Midori, thank you so much for talking to me. I've been a fan of your work and you as a person for a really long time. And I thought, when you reached out to me, I reached out to you. I was thinking about this because I feel like I don't know anybody in real life who embodies the kind of intersections of sex and art quite as effectively and remarkably as you do. And I'd love to just kind of dive in by discussing how, I know you mostly through the sex ed community and through your work as a rope person. I would love for you to maybe talk about how you got into rope, your history with rope, and how it informs the rest of your work.
Great. Hey, and thank you. Thank you so much for having me on this. And I am so excited about getting to talk about, art and the intersection with sexuality and my work. All right, so let's see. Diving in, for the listeners out there who know me, some of you know me from my artwork, some of you know me from my teaching work, and some of you may even know my book, Seductive Art of Japanese Bondage, which was the first English language instruction book on Shibari. And the funny thing was, when Greenery Press first approached me to write that book, because I was already playing with rope bondage and teaching it, it was such a niche kink, Japanese rope bondage, that the publisher didn't think it would actually sell a lot, but she went out of her way and made a photo book, and making photo books kind of expensive. So she thought, okay, first run, 8,000 copies, and it probably won't sell out. Well, it sold out in a month.
Wow.
Because back then it wasn't popular. You wouldn't know this today, right? But yeah, back then it was just a niche thing, and it has been in continuous sale and reprint since 2001. So 20 years of it. I'm working on my second book on that slowly through my Patreon. But about my relationship with rope, because of that book and because I founded Rope Dojo, etc. A lot of people think that I've encountered this where people think that, oh, you're into rope bondage, and that's why you're using rope in your artwork, because a lot of my artwork incorporates rope, twine, fiber, string, yarn, even, and people think, oh, it's because of the bondage, and you're making bondage art. And I'll be honest, when people say that, oh, you do bondage art, it just kind of makes me grit my teeth, because it's not bondage art. And my relationship to rope, a lot of people imagine it backwards than what it is. It's not that I was into bondage and then got into fiber arts, but rather I'm originally from Japan, born and raised in Japan, and this is a country with a lot of textile art, fiber art. More specifically, I have had a lifelong fondness for folk craft, weaving, and the practical, pragmatic use of cloth and rope. When I was a baby, and this was in Japan when I was a baby, most of the parents were getting newfangled plastic and vinyl cribs for their baby because it was modern, right? Well, yeah, except my mom, who got me an old-fashioned farmer's crib, which is this, imagine a giant bowl made out of woven grass mat, and a big basket that is lined in cotton batting and cotton fabric. So it's this giant bowl, and it was meant for farmers to put their babies in the bowl next to their rice paddy while they were tending the farm.
Sure. Sounds cozy.
And, there might be an Akita dog that's, minding the baby, because Akitas are good baby minders. And I have such a fondness for the feel of that basket. And then a fondness for the tatami mat. It smells of sweetgrass, fresh tatami. Yeah, and if you were well-to-do, every year you got new tatami mats for your house, like you got new carpeting. And if you were poor, you tended to your grass mat and your tatami really well, and then repaired it. So, like folk, and this is, not the craft of rich people, like sandals woven in grass, and in like trees in Japan. If you visit Japan, I hope you get to. In the wintertime, trees in gardens are wrapped in grass mats, and you would think it's to keep the frost off. Well, I asked a gardener. They would take these like rough-hewn grass mats and wrap the trees. What happens is tree burrowing pests, like beetles, would burrow into the mats, but not the tree. And at the end of the winter, they take the mats off and burn it.
Wow.
Protecting the trees. And so being surrounded by agriculture, and now while I was a Tokyo child, because my mother was into documenting traditional arts, I was this city kid. It's kind of like growing up in old Brooklyn. That's kind of my neighborhood, right? Old Brooklyn, crowded, urban, everybody in everybody's business in a good way. But then there was like the country Japan, traditional Japan that my mother had me connected to. And so I've had such a fascination with the humble craft that even the poorest people would try to make aesthetically pleasing and practical out of common things. So those are my roots, and working with textile and working with rope. And then when I, got to like my somewhere along the way, growing up, I'm picking up images in Japanese sword movies where people will get tied up, much in the way that in American westerns or in Batman and Wonder Woman, you'd see people tied up. So, that image is in my head, that romance of back in the day. And by the time I'm starting to get sexual, well, I was a poor college kid. I couldn't afford like fancy leather stuff, and not to mention I didn't know most of the stuff even existed. So, I'm in college. Hey, boyfriend, tie me up, fuck me. I'll tie you up, fuck you. And, using clothesline.
Oh, whoa.
I mean, that's, clothesline, hardware store, clothesline, UC Berkeley, co-op apartment, on a futon, kind of half-ass tying each other up. Okay?
Fantastic.
Yeah, nothing fancy. But then something in the back of my mind was like, okay, all of this like wrapping, tying, and so just, anything that could be done, most anything except the smell of leather can be done in terms of the shape with rope.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you said that your book was the first English language. Were you aware of Japanese language rope books at the time?
Oh, sure. There's Japan's a highly literate culture with a huge publishing industry. Very enviable, don't you think, as fellow writer? I mean, if you got a topic, you can get it published, and tiny publishers thrive in Japan. So anytime that there's any sort of niche interest, there's a book. And so there have been lots of different instruction books in Japan, but most of it never left Japan. And there were some that left Japan and came through places like QSM, which was back in the 90s a BDSM education and bookstore that was in all things Noe Valley.
Oh, wow.
Noe Valley.
I'm trying to think of like an analog for people who don't know San Francisco, but it's like, bougie, kind of stuck up, kind of, how would you describe Noe Valley?
Well, yeah, back then it wasn't that bougie yet, but it was kind of like upper middle class. You would probably see Volvos, not Audis.
Got it.
Yeah. Okay. So, people talk about Folsom Street and all of that South of Market leather cultural district, which is legit, but there's also 30th and Church.
All right. So there was
that was like weirdly kink central.
Yeah. Huh, that's so interesting. I wonder because rope has obviously, it feels like it, because of its practicality, transcends class, but there is a certain amount of, and maybe it's just kind of the way that Americans interpret shibari, this idea of it kind of being this fancy art form around sex. It's not like the kind of dark and dirty club kind of sex, but it is kind of you would see it in a fancy penthouse, or you would see it at a fancy mansion party more likely than you would a lot of other art forms. Do you feel like that's related to why that kind of store would be in Noe Valley?
Not at all. Not at all. And absolutely. So the idea that Japanese rope bondage or shibari is this like fancy, complicated thing is relatively modern and fueled by the internet and the visual competition. And there's a lot of other sociological factors that go into it. But when you look at the way that it was represented in consumable pornography in Japan until rather recently, as well as how it's actually practiced in Japan by, Mr. and Mrs. Average, is down and dirty. Yeah, it's kind of at the level. Yeah, it's kind of like, it's down and dirty. Yep. And the theatrical aspect in Japan and theatrical fancy aspect of it was represented in swingers club and BDSM specific bars. So it's kind of like if you look at like the theatrical performative stuff and assume that's how Mr. and Mrs. Average Japanese are fucking, it's kind of like looking at Cirque du Soleil and saying that's like traditional Canadian, French Canadian sex.
Interesting. Gotcha.
Yeah, I mean, I do I want to be like seduced by some French Canadian accented nubile creature in glitter and feathers while swinging upside down with impossible bendiness? Sure.
Yeah, I mean that's something
Sure.
I've heard this spoken about, kind of where it's almost like a, again, American version, like this fetishization of what we assume to be like feudal Japan, right? This kind of like high class stratification. Kind of, so there is a lot of gildedness and there's a lot of ceremony, and so it almost like we would interpret like, Victorian England, and it's like we're only thinking about the highest of the high classes when we tell these stories, and we ignore the various classes that were, again, down and dirty, or just working with the clotheslines that they had, or just doing this for fun, and not having a four-piece orchestra performing behind them, and the perfect lighting and all of the gilded outfits and stuff.
So let me tell you a story about how it's perceived from over there. How Americans have sex. That all Americans have really big houses and everybody has guns. And how Americans have sex is that all American women have giant watermelon boobs and they're all really blonde, and that the men are all completely hairless and have large circumcised penises, and American sex is it's really acrobatic with women who always look extremely happy.
Awesome.
In big houses with pools.
With pools. The pool's really important, and the hot tub. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's called Orientalism, and Orientalism in art history is it's there's a movement of Orientalists, Jerome, for example, but then there's the critique and examination of the Orientalist and the colonizing aspect of it, and with cultural appropriation and fetishization that appears to be complementary doesn't get critiqued, right? It's again the noble savage issue. So dehumanizing an entire population, or in this case, actually entirely whitewashing the strategies of ordinary people and how they fuck and mate and court, and elevating it into an unrealistic, two-dimensionalizing status thing, right? So, in a lot of ways, when I've heard things about like how people say, it's in Japan, it's always women who are submitting, and Japanese women are so submissive, and they all love rope, is as if to say all the sexualized things of black male and black female bodies. It is just as offensive.
I would like to continue this conversation. I want to pause for just a second because I want to double check that your audio is okay. So I'm hearing a little bit of a clicking, and it might be on my side, but I just want to make sure that you're not that there's like no wires hitting your shirt or anything, and that your connection is solid.
Well, let me take my glasses off. Maybe it's the glasses on the headset. Okay. I don't know. Okay. Sorry.
That's fine. No, right. It's totally fine. I just want to make sure.
Yeah. Shall we shift into the art side of things?
Yeah, let's just pick it up. So I would love to talk a little bit about, like, kind of segueing from your rope interest sexually into the installation work that you do. And the piece that, I mean, you've done a lot of work, and I want to talk about a lot of it. But one of the pieces that I had moved away from the Bay Area a couple years ago, and the first thing that I saw that made me like really sad that I wasn't in the Bay Area was your In the Pines installation. Um, because
Oh, yes.
because I have such a love for installation work anyway, but I think what I thought was so captivating about that was both the location that you chose and also the scale of the work. So can you just kind of describe In the Pines and your inspiration behind that piece?
So in the Pines, one day I got a call from one of my favorite curators, Justin Hoover from Collective Action Studios, that they had access to an apartment building in Noe Valley. Once again, Noe Valley. That was
Keep coming back to Noe Valley.
right, and the apartment supposedly was being vacated for reno, and we were given access for a month's time for several artists under the Collective Action Studios to go in and create room-specific, site-specific installations. Mm. And it is a 1912 Victorian apartment building, obviously made for working class people. One bedroom, one parlor, fireplace, and another small room, which could have been a maid's room, and a kitchen. Very utilitarian, right? Not one of the Nob Hill mansions. And still very much original fixture, plaster and lath work. And I went to the top floor room and I put dibs on that. So if you walk it through this, you walk up 3 flights, narrow stairs. You walk down a long hallway, open a dark wooden door, walk down another long hallway. You open the door and you're suddenly hit with this. First thing you'll notice is the smell of what must be a farm. You smell dirt. You smell hay, you smell hemp, you smell vegetation, and then the room opens into the bedroom and the parlor, and you walk into what is essentially a bramble, a tightly woven tangle of a forest of ropes, of just, and you come to one clearing, which I called the meadow. And then you duck through another rope tangle entryway. It's like an arbor, a dense old arbor. And then you come to another opening within which there is an aged wooden swing hanging off of ropes. And as you sit in it, you look out to the sky and above the tree, because it's just above the tree canopy line. And you sit in the swing. Now, the rope arbor and the jungle, the tangle is actually load bearing. And and in the first clearing, there is also a large chair that almost looks like a strange large bird nest with large, like 6-inch diameter rope wrapped around the base of it. So there's, and once the guests realized that, you can climb. The best day I had was there were these twins there, 11-year-old twins. And I looked at them and said, I dare you, can you play lava from here and make it all the way around through the entire thing without touching the floor?
Oh my gosh, that's so cool. Yeah, and it's such a interesting, I mean, think about that as a child, like how we so often, if we get taken to museums at all, if we're lucky enough to, as children, we learn very early, like don't touch, don't play, like you're only supposed to look and use your eyes to touch. And then if you go into an installation, they're like, oh no, like dig in, kids. Like that would be just thrilling.
Yeah, and initially the kids were like, oh no, and another one was like, apparently wasn't that physically confident, and they were like, oh, you don't know, I can. And next thing you know, crawling around, and yeah, and it was the title "In the Pines" was actually intentional. It's a Lead Belly song, and which Nirvana covered as well. If you
Mm-hmm.
listen to it, it's quite chilling. There are several different versions of it. And it refers to late 19th century labor migration. And you don't know if the song goes in the pines, where the cold wind blows. Baby, where did you sleep last night?
Mm-hmm.
Hey girl, where did you sleep last? Okay. And it's a chilling song. You don't know if she's running away.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know if she's been raped. You
Mm-hmm.
don't know who died. You don't know if this is a sex worker at the camps or if it's somebody running away. Depending on the version, it's running away from lover, husband, father,
Mm-hmm.
sleeping the cold night away in the pines.
Mm-hmm.
It, to me, it echoes back to the working class people moving through late 19th century and early 20th century migration. I live in the Bayview in San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the migrant labor and black diaspora ended up here and working in the war industry and the Navy Yard. You would not know that now from the history, from how San Francisco is now, but it was where you could start a life if you were a working person.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the pines, like being in a forest. And during the daytime, if you come in the pines, it's a beautiful, cheerful place. But as the sun starts to set in Noe Valley and the apartment gets dark, the indoor forest becomes menacing.
Mm-hmm.
I've
Yeah, well,
spent many a night
yeah.
there, yeah,
Mm. Well, it's got almost like a
and the
spider web
moon comes
effect,
through.
right? So you kind of have this like
Yeah.
it becomes menacing and frightening and no longer playground, but more of
Mm.
something to escape.
The other elements in this is the use of the hemp rope here is actually quite intentional, and it has nothing to do with Japan.
Mm.
It actually has to do with American labor and working class because hemp was a major agricultural product in 19th century Japan.
Mm.
19th century America, sorry, 19th century America. Hemp was a major agricultural business that was then overshadowed by King Cotton. So you have that. And rope, hemp rope is a significant aspect of San Francisco Navy industry, as well as what's used in the theater. They
Mm.
still use hemp rope. Many of the hemp rope that I got were cast offs from construction industry and the San Francisco theater, such as the operas, and they're used for pulling the curtains up and down. They're
Mm.
used for keeping the ships operating, and it's part of not only the agriculture of America, but also what made the steam era, industrial revolution era America and theater,
Mm.
lest we
Cool.
forget.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's
Yeah.
also something I think about a lot as a theater nerd that we have this idea right now in modern America for some reason that like theater is this fancy art form. It's this high class art form, almost like the opera, whereas
Mm-hmm.
that's not the history of the theater by any means, almost exclusively cross culturally. But it's
Mm-hmm.
certainly a very new invention, the idea of really expensive tickets, really hard to get to, dress up and have, a fancy night. Like it was originally an art form of the people by the people. And so the idea is that the materials themselves would tie the working classes between their art forms and their work makes perfect sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And given that and then this comes to full circle because I'm addressing and reflecting upon the building that was built at one of the periods of migration and displacement, migration of working class folks and the displacement of working class folks as we're going into World War One.
Mm.
Now, I'm building this at the time when there's displacement and gentrification going on in San Francisco in the same place. So I'm connecting through time, using the rope, bringing two time periods into the same physical space.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So there's all that's going on, And whether people get that or not as they're climbing around or swinging in the swing, I don't really care. If they do, great. And if they just come around and have fun and climb around, great. I witnessed several people sitting in the swing just having whatever reflections they were having. And then as I was, because the exhibition was never shown to the public and only by private viewing, if you were in town, I would have totally had you and your friends come in and playing. I had this really interesting internal experience myself, because as a social practice and installation artist, what my experience internally as people are sharing an experience in my work is constantly evolving. So there was a moment in which I was sitting in the corner. I was perched in one of the branches, right? And just letting my friends and guests just climb around. And I found myself hunched up with, sitting on my haunches in the rope branch with my knees pulled up, looking with a silly little grin and keeping my mouth shut and just watching. And then I realized, wait a sec. When I was a little girl, I would go into abandoned lots and what I could find of woods and parks, looking for little people and magical creatures. And I was always looking for them, convinced that if I looked hard enough, I could see them. And I was convinced that they wanted to be friends. And then suddenly I found myself being a little strange forest creature who wanted to play with the human children, so built herself a playground.
It speaks to the scale of the work that you do.
Yeah.
Which I would actually love to then segue into Invocation, which is another large-scale rope installation piece. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And no, but actually, before you get into that, I just want to say for people listening along, if they want to see these pieces as we go, planetmidori.com is the best way to. You got pictures of a lot of your artwork there, I'm assuming, yes.
Yes, if you go to planetmidori.com and just go to the tab that says CV, that's where I just dump in all the most recent thing will be up top. So,
okay, great.
Yeah, Invocation. Yeah, Invocation is spelled with a capital I and a capital V, so it actually looks like invocation, but also invocation. What it looks like is if you walk into a gallery, and this was first commissioned by the Lohman Museum of Gay Lesbian Art in New York City. You walk in, and again, you walk in the gallery, and first you are hit by the smell of the rope, because I have a lot of components of scent into my work that doesn't come through on the web, which is a shame. And then there is this enormous, what looks initially like a curtain that goes from the floor to ceiling. It's 15 feet tall, and it's a woven rope tube. It's like a tiny room. Imagine taking like a woven mat and making it into just about the size of a circular dressing room, going all the way up to the ceiling. And as you look at this, there are objects that are woven into it, and some of it looks like strips of cloth, and then there's things like vibrators and keyboards, and you look at some of what looks like fabric, and you realize that they're panties and jock straps. And over here is a thigh-high boot, like rolled up and woven in, and then there might be a speculum down there, and you realize that there's an opening, like a curtain opening. So you walk in, and you're allowed to walk in, and you look up, and there are all these objects hanging and woven in, everything from stockings to cordless phones. Okay, so that's the physical appearance of it. And it was commissioned for a show by Alexis Heller, curated by Alexis Heller, called On Our Backs, The Revolutionary Art of Queer Sex Workers. My piece is about memory, the memory of labor. And the objects, I put out a public call for people who have identified as queer and people who have or are doing any form of sex work as they self-define, and to contribute to me, to entrust with me an object that is a totemic object of their memory. I mean, we all have little things that we carry around that we kind of keep from move to move, and it reminds us of some person, time period, something. And I have way too many of these, and I think a lot of people do. It no longer serves an actual practical purpose, but it feels dishonor to throw it away.
Mm-hmm.
But why do you still carry it? And maybe it even has mixed memories in it, like old love letters. Yeah. And there's a ritual in Japan called Harikuyo, the memorial of the needles. Mm. And once a year, people would take their broken sewing needles. Now, sewing needles have been, historically and industrially, expensive commodities. Mm-hmm. If it's a bone needle, it takes a long time to make it. Metal needles were hard to come by too until modern era. And if you are a seamstress, or if you are an entertainer, a singer, a dancer, a courtesan, an actor, or maybe you make garments for a living, your sewing needle serves your craft. And when it breaks, you can't just throw it away, because that's doing disservice to the object that's allowed you to make a living. Mm. So you collect it, and once a year, to the temple or the shrine, the priest or the monk will give a prayer, and you let it rest in a tofu, because tofu is like the softest thing. It's like getting to retire into a beautiful bed. So I take the objects of memory and I give it a new life as an artwork. And because it is now, and so often the story of sex work is told from either victimization, vilification, or all of these different stigma and stories. But what if these were just objects with personal stories that no one will ever know? Mm. And I'm also erasing disregarding, erasing, flattening the intersex work hierarchy that exists. Mm-hmm. Because let's face it, there is. Mm-hmm. And there's there's survival sex work, and there's privileged sex work. There's somebody, there might be somebody who says, oh, I'm a stripper, I'm not a hands-on hooker. Mm-hmm. Or, well, I'm a courtesan, I'm not a this. Or, and whatever, that actually happens. And even within the same industry. So, for example, I asked Cecilia Tan and Laura Antonou, both accomplished smut writers. Mm-hmm. I asked them, do you consider yourself sex workers? Mm-hmm. It was interesting because Laura said, no, I'm sex work adjacent. But Cecilia Tan said, yes, I am a sex worker because I create products for erotic entertainment that can be censored and controlled by the whim of so-called cultural and political norms. And my distribution is limited by oftentimes arbitrary laws. Mm. And then she wrote this amazing essay because Cecilia is
because
amazing.
She's Cecilia Tan, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and so she ended up writing this most amazing thing. And and so it was interesting having this discussion, right? And so Cecilia Tan's keyboard from 25 years ago is in the sculpture. Mm.
That's awesome.
Annie Sprinkle's speculum is in there.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
Annie, yes. And Annie entrusted me with one of her red wigs from her herstory performance.
Nice.
And I was in the museum with all of these artifacts laid out, and then the curator and the art director happens to come by going, is that Annie's wig? I'm like, yeah. And then I'm shredding it. I'm cutting it and I'm shredding it. And I could just hear their hearts skip a beat. Mm-hmm. As I'm cutting and shredding, and I'm twisting it into rope.
Wow.
I'm making rope out of Annie's wig, and I was joking about, forget about pashmina. I mean, the latest thing is consensually harvested single source stripper wool.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Oh, and
Well,
there was this most amazing thing that happened at that exhibition on the opening night. This woman showed up, and she looked a little upset, agitated. I wasn't sure what was going on. And she said, "Hi, I donated that brown collar in your sculpture." Yes, that belonged to a client of mine from 20 years ago, and he died. And he was such a dear, and I didn't know what to do with it. And he would be so happy to be in this sculpture. And I think then she was about to burst into tears because she left quickly.
Oh,
yeah.
I think that's actually a really beautiful anecdote too, because I think it speaks to the emotions behind so much of the connections that are formed in sex work. And I think that, again, the mainstream perceptions are this kind of soulless work. And I think that is it does such a disservice to people who do form true emotional, intimate connections with their clients, even if they're not traditional relationships, what we'd associate with a traditional sexual relationship. Like, there's so much tenderness there, and a lot of people can find, like, to be able to place a piece of, of a cherished memory of a client in an artwork that feels exalting in a way that I think so often sex workers specifically are denied that public exploration of their own emotional connection to their clients. That's really lovely. Wow. Well, you have so much artwork, and I want to talk about like 8 different things. So, well, I mean, I wanted to mention the dining room because I thought it was kind of an interesting departure from your fiber work, but at the same time dealt with memory and kind of quotidianness in a similar way. Would you be open to talking about that a little bit?
Happy to.
Okay,
So
cool.
with the dining room, I love that piece. I hope I get to do it several more times. It also has a social practice element to it. But if you're walking into a gallery, okay, this time, unlike the others, you don't have a smell. All right. You walk in the gallery, and first thing you're going to see is a window hanging in midair. And then on the other side of the window, it's like an old window, wood sash and all that. And then you see what looks like a white shag carpet, a simple dining table, 4 chairs, and 4 plates. Okay? And a mirror on the other side. As you approach closer, you realize that your reflection is in the mirror, placing you in the room. As you get closer, the shag carpet isn't a shag carpet. It's broken crockery, neatly put back into a rectangular carpet shape. And the 4 plates on the top of the dining table have been glued back together. One plate glued back really well. Another one looks totally scarred, but attempted to be glued back. And plate over here, the glue is neat. The other one, the glue is like spilling, messy gluing. So that's what it looks like. How it is made is also important. The night before the installation, I throw a shatter party where I invite people to come break dishes into a designated area. So people are handed safety glasses, and there's a giant table of dishes, some of it donated and otherwise sourced. I also invite people to bring their own dishes to shatter. And they get in line, and then they get to what I call the pitcher's mound, and then break the dish. Now, the first time I did this, I had set up the table, and then after they break the dish, they come over for some donuts. And I figured they'd come for the donuts. No, what ended up happening was people kept going back. And they would stand politely in line. They would clutch whatever plate or cup or whatever, all ceramic, no glass, and safety issue. Clutching their plate, politely talking to one another. And then they get to the pitcher's mound, and their face changes as they shatter. And some people would take several of them, and smash, and their eyes dilate, their nostrils flare up, and their breathing gets heavy, and they come off with this like somewhere between exhilarated, high, and rushed look. And they kept going back in line. Now, one of the times I did this, a woman showed up with the entire full set of wedding china from her
Whoa.
mother's first marriage.
Whoa. That's powerful stuff.
Wedgwood.
Oh, man. Wow.
And she shattered. What was interesting was that I noticed after the first time I did this, the next day I woke up feeling exhausted and hungover, and yet I had nothing to drink. So I checked in with my art assistants, who were also staffing the shatter party. They had the same feeling.
Mm-hmm.
We had absorbed
Yeah.
the grief and the rage. So the next time I did that, I told my art assistants and the volunteers that will be happening and to ready themselves. That we are holding emotions that will be released.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not a woo person, and I don't often speak in esoteric, but that hungover feel was for real.
Yeah.
And then I sweep it into a little shag carpet, and the installation is finished. Oh, there was a couple of cute things that happened, and some really, and during the exhibitions, I would hang out, and then I would kind of walk up next to a person who's looking at this really deeply, and I'll ask, so what you feeling? And yeah, I asked a fellow artist, so what you feeling? Because here's this boisterous dude, right? And he was so quiet, and he said, I can't talk about it. It's my family. I can't talk about it. Then there was another person that I sidled up to, and they said, yeah, I remember when my mom couldn't protect me.
Oof.
Holy shit. Right? Yeah, heavy. And then there was this other one that I totally did not expect. Somebody from, I don't remember where she was from, but she was somewhere like Central or Eastern European. And she looked happy looking at this. I was like, wow, that's different. And I went up to, so what are you feeling? And said, oh, where I come from, we have this tradition when people get married that the friends go into the house and break the old china so they can start a new life. Oh, okay.
Huh. That's nice. That feels like, it's a different way of perceiving the same tradition.
Right. And, since the title is just dining room, and I'm having people have whatever their process is around it, it was so interesting. There was one shadow party. Oh, my God, this was so adorable. Okay. It was at Root Division in San Francisco. There was a dad and a little kid, and I don't know, a little kid, maybe 5. Okay. And, I'm off staffing the plate table, and dad comes over, and the kid looks really shy behind dad, and he said, my son has a question. I hope you don't mind. You're the artist, right? I'm like, yes. Okay. Ask. And the kid is holding on to a ceramic, in one of the shatter piles was a ceramic silver robot coin bank. It was looked like a robot painted silver and a money bank. He was like, can I have this? And then the dad was like, yeah, how much do you want for it? I'm like, tell you what, I'll make you a deal, kid. Okay. You can have this under the one condition that you save money in it.
Oh.
If you promise me that, you can have the robot. I looked at the dad, and the dad was like, mouth, thanks. So,
that's cute. That's good.
Promise me, kiddo, you're gonna save some money in that robot, okay? Yeah.
You're gonna need it for your art career.
This ceramic robot. Yeah, that's right. Because man, if I had quarters to fill that robot, that would be more than I make on any given art project.
Well, so we could totally. I mean, you have such a storied and beautiful art career. We could talk about it for hours. But kind of thought that the dining room kind of inspired me to ask you more about like your interpersonal work and the work that you do with clients, and
Hmm.
maybe even tying back to the sex ed work you do. Like, I think one of the more maybe kind of consumer facing public things that I've seen you do recently was when you introduced Zoe Ligon to Shibari on her web series, Sex Stuff,
Yeah.
and the emotional connection. I think that at the end of that piece was so beautiful, and I think it speaks to, again, like the kind of that this isn't just static work. This is work that involves the emotions and sometimes the histories of people. So, can you talk to me a little bit about how you integrate the arts into either your sex ed or just kind of the counseling and consulting work that you do?
Sure. Okay. So I consider the sex ed and the coaching, as well as my art making, to be two sides of the same coin.
Mm.
They're both about creativity. So
Mhm.
on my sex ed, sure, I may be talking about sex and kink, but really it's about creative, empowered, and authentic living,
Mm.
right? How do we not get stuck in the lines that somebody else drew for us? So, yeah, and then my art, and so how do you express yourself? So the teaching is you, student, listener, how do you express yourself? My art is how do I express myself? I have to have both. Now I do a lot. I do a lot of private coaching, and sure, it may start off from the portal of kink, but a
Mm.
lot of times, and increasingly so, it's about the dialogue of creativity. And many of my students, I'm a little biased here. I do think that kinky people who have kink in their brain and their loins also tend to be creative people, and not
Mhm.
surprisingly, many of them are writers and many different forms of creatives. And I've been taking the coaching time to prompt them, coach them, cajole them, cheer them, challenge them into their own creative process.
Mm.
And and creativity, art is communication.
Mm.
Sex and eroticism is communication. And that may be communication with ourselves to strip ourselves of the pretenses. And it may be communication with others as well. So, yeah, it's all about creativity. So I love, 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 love coaching people around erotic creativity as well as life creativity.
Mm. That's so interesting because I feel like it makes it sound so much more accessible than I think a lot of people who might either fetishize the idea of artist being an artist or fetishize the idea of, the people who do really intense, kinky sex. Like, I think there is this barrier that a lot of people see between, like, their lives and these freaky deakies living on the other side of it. Whereas I think a lot of us who are maybe on the freaky deaky side of it see it as just a very natural continuum of experience and creativity and a willingness to maybe try things or just give yourself the chance to communicate or to be heard for your authentic self, as opposed to, at some point you will be then considered the weird pervert who's hanging out at Folsom. It doesn't look like that to a lot of us. It looks like just stepping into one's authentic expression.
Yeah, or it might be the weird pervert hanging out in Noe Valley.
Those are the ones you gotta watch out for.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, the term artist has become too precious.
Mm.
Humans are creative.
Mhm. Yeah, it
Yeah.
does. I mean, kind of pulling back to the idea, like what you're mentioning Orientalism at the beginning, like this idea of like it creates this fetish, it creates this otherness, as opposed to like we have a lot more in common, and it's not some sort of weird alien thing. It is just another version of expression, and
Hmm.
the idea of the artist identity being so fetishized as to kind of lose its connection to humanity, which I think does
Hmm.
everyone a disservice, not just artists or people who consider themselves non-artistic.
Hmm. Hmm.
Wow. Well,
Absolutely agreed.
We are so close to running out of time, but is there anything else that you wanted to speak to? Any other things that we didn't get to touch
Oh,
on? There's so much in your career; it's huge. So,
my Patreon, my
oh yes,
Patreon.
let's
This
talk
is
about it.
my Patreon is, if you are listening to this later, we are recording this in the middle of the pandemic of COVID, and I am not teaching classes in person. I have had my Patreon for years, and it's been supporting my writing and teaching work, but writing and art making specifically. But now I have made a decision to take all of what I share with people into my Patreon. And I'm doing really interesting things that I'm actively crossing over sexuality, creativity, and art. Like I do Whip Fit class where you get to do a little bit of moving and light cardio with my awesome flogging movements. But I'm also doing all ages community twine twisting as a calming meditative story hour. I'm also reaching out to my subscribers for, I'll run a story draft by them. And I've also been sharing my trials and travails in applying to grants and residencies. And they've been supporting me as I get my rejection letter from this show or that. Yeah. And having office hours, and I'll talk about art and sex during my office hours. So I want to because the times are strange, and I've been making a sort of like a gym membership. So if you can only pay $5 a month, great. If you can pay more than that, great. And all of it is available to you. And for those of you who there may not be supporting me with as much with your wallet, support me with your cheers. Because I'm just applying to a residency up in Marin, and I ask people to wish me luck. And, it means a lot when somebody says, yeah, good luck with that. And then somebody else is like, hey, I can help you edit your copy. And I'm like, oh my God,
Oh my
yes,
God, yeah.
yes. I have the worst time writing about my artwork.
It's so hard.
You
And that's the
know,
thing, like the artist statement is like the most loathed thing in the art world. It's like, how dare you ask me to tell
oh,
you what I'm doing? Just let me do it.
right. And if I had words to describe this, I wouldn't have to perform it.
Yep.
Because I don't have the words, I sit there and break dishes
Yeah.
because I'm too angry. I'm so angry and I'm so hurt from whatever it is that we're experiencing individually or culturally, or the memory hurts so much that I can't put words to it. So let's just fucking break dishes. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think
Yeah.
so. So tell, what's the link to the
Oh,
Patreon?
so patreon.com/Planet Midori. Yes,
Planet
all my
Midori.
stuff is Planet Midori. Yeah. So
Awesome.
support me in Patreon, and I give lots of special things to my Patreons. Like, oh my God, I've been making COVID pandemic zines. I'll send you some of my zines. They're really funny. You can print them
Cool.
out on your printer. And one is the COVID feels coloring book.
No. That's awesome. See, this
All
is
the
what I
people.
mean, your career is so cool because I mean, again, like, I think what's so special about Patreon too is it allows people to kind of experience like the many facets of what you do, and to try and limit you as like, I'm a Shibari educator or I'm a BDSM coach or any of these things is to, I think, lose a lot of the context of what makes your work special. And so I think like places like Patreon and just like indulging in your artwork allows people to see how this is, again, like connected. This isn't just one, these aren't silos. These are, your rope connects to your installation, which connects to your, psychological background, which connects to all these other things, which I think is really important. And really, I think it adds a value to people's experiences of the work that you do.
Thank you. Oh, I'm starting a new thing. I'm
Yeah.
starting Auntie Midori's BDSM basics.
Oh.
Little half hour segments like, what is a flogger? What is a kinky party like? what is a safe word? Things like that, like total basics. So stuff that like, I don't cover in my workshops because, yeah, and I think it's going to be fun because it's going to be highly opinionated and full of foul language as I do.
But again, I think that's really fun. Like, so much sex education is like a lot of just the how-tos, and I think that loses a lot of the why, and I think that so much of us, the curiosity around sexuality, and again, some of the more complex or more out there sexuality is not the how do I cane somebody, but what about caning is exciting, and what about going to a sex party is exciting, and how does one approach that, I think is really valuable.
Yeah, and I'm going to be having some fun with that. So yeah, if you're listening to this, please do swing by my Patreon, and I am there all the time, so I'd love to be hearing from y'all.
Oh, yay. Well, Midori, I think we've run out of time, but I want to just thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I've again been such a fan of your work, and I've appreciated you, sharing community with you for years, and I'm so excited to see what comes next.
Thank you.
And that is it for this week's episode of the Artgasm Podcast. Thank you, as always, for joining. And if you'd like to listen to more, please do consider becoming a Patreon supporter. You can go to patreon.com/artgasm. That's patreon.com/artgasm, and support this podcast for as little as $1 a month. It really does add up and mean the world to me. It allows me to continue producing this from my little office in my little house. And I really do appreciate all the support I get from people just listening and sharing and responding. It's wonderful. Until next time, talk to you then. Bye-bye.